A prejudiced bank teller's worst nightmare came true when the black woman she repeatedly mocked as too poor turned out to be there to buy the entire bank. Sometimes karma arrives with a signature on the dotted line. The marble floors of Heritage Bank gleamed under the morning sunlight, streaming through tall windows, their pristine surface reflecting Michelle Richardson's determined stride as she approached the teller counter. At 35, Michelle carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had built success from the ground up. Her fitted charcoal blazer and crisp white blouse spoke of executive meetings, while her natural hair was styled in an elegant crown of intricate twists, a deliberate choice that honored her identity as a black woman who refused to conform to others' expectations. The teller, Catherine Walsh, barely glanced up from her computer screen. Her fingers continued typing as Michelle stood waiting, despite being the only customer in line. After what felt like an eternity, Catherine's eyes flickered toward Michelle, then immediately back to her screen. "Someone will be with you shortly," she said, her tone carrying the same warmth as the marble beneath Michelle's feet. "I'm standing right here," Michelle said evenly, "and you don't appear to be helping anyone else at the moment." Catherine's lips tightened into a thin line as she finally looked up, her gaze sweeping over Michelle with poorly concealed disdain. "Do you have an account with us?" The question carried an unmistakable subtext. "You don't belong here." "I'm here to make a deposit," Michelle replied, maintaining her composure. She'd encountered this type of treatment before. The assumptions, the subtle and not so subtle signs that certain spaces weren't meant for people who looked like her. But today was different. Today she knew something Catherine didn't. "Heritage Bank serves a very exclusive clientele," Catherine said, emphasizing the word exclusive as if it were a velvet rope she could use to bar entry. "Our minimum deposit requirements are quite substantial." Michelle reached into her designer briefcase and retrieved an envelope. "I'm aware of your requirements. I'd like to deposit these checks, please." Catherine's hand moved toward the envelope with visible reluctance. As she opened it, her eyes widened slightly at the contents. Several checks with significant sums. Her surprise quickly morphed into suspicion. "These are rather large amounts. We'll need to verify the authenticity of these checks. It could take some time." She glanced past Michelle to where another customer, a white man in a golf shirt, had just entered. "Perhaps you'd like to try another bank, one more suited to your usual transactions." "I'm happy to wait," Michelle said, taking a seat in the lobby's plush leather chair. She watched as Catherine immediately beckoned the new customer forward as processing his simple withdrawal with a warm smile and friendly chatter about his weekend plans. More customers arrived, and Michelle observed as Catherine continued to serve them ahead of her. Each time Michelle approached the counter to inquire about her deposit, Catherine found a new excuse for delay. The verification system was running slowly. The branch manager was unavailable. They needed additional documentation. "You understand," Catherine said with false sympathy. "We have to be especially careful with unusual transactions. We have protocols for situations that seem out of the ordinary." Her emphasis on the last words made it clear exactly what she found unusual about the situation. Michelle's phone buzzed with a message from her assistant confirming her afternoon meeting with Heritage Bank's board of directors. She allowed herself a small smile as she replied, knowing that in a few hours everything would change. But for now she continued to wait, documenting every interaction, every slight, every moment Catherine chose to serve other customers ahead of her. A young black couple entered the bank, and Michelle watched with growing anger as Catherine directed them to use the ATM outside, claiming all tellers were currently busy, despite her window being clearly open. The couple left, embarrassment visible on their faces, and Michelle made another note on her phone. "Miss Richardson?" A different voice called out. Michelle looked up to see an older man in an expensive suit approaching. "I'm David Cooper, the branch manager. Could you step into my office? There seem to be some concerns about your deposit." Inside the manager's office, Cooper spoke in carefully measured tones about verification processes and bank policies, while Catherine hovered near the door with poorly concealed satisfaction. Michelle listened patiently, noting how neither of them had offered her a seat. "Perhaps," Catherine interjected from the doorway, "you could explain the source of these funds? We don't typically see people like yourself handling transactions of this size." The pause before "people like yourself" hung in the air like smoke, its meaning unmistakable. Michelle straightened her spine, adjusting her blazer with deliberate precision. "Actually," she said, her voice carrying the weight of countless similar conversations, I believe I'll hold on to these checks for now. I have another meeting this afternoon that might make this conversation unnecessary. See? Catherine said to Cooper, not bothering to lower her voice. I told you something wasn't right about this. They always have some excuse when you start asking the real questions. Michelle gathered her belongings, maintaining her composure as she stood. Mr. Cooper, Ms. Walsh, I want to thank you both for making this morning so illuminating. It's been, she paused, allowing herself a small smile, educational. I'll be sure to remember every detail of our interaction when I meet with the board of directors this afternoon. The board of directors? Cooper's face flickered with uncertainty. Yes, Michelle said, walking to the door. We have some important matters to discuss about the future of Heritage Bank, including its current practices regarding customer service and equal treatment. She turned back one last time, taking in Catherine's confused expression and Cooper's growing discomfort. I look forward to making some changes around here, very soon. As Michelle walked out of the bank, her phone buzzed again. Another message confirmed that all the paperwork was ready for the afternoon meeting. The due diligence was complete, the financing secured. She smiled, knowing that Catherine Walsh had no idea that her discriminatory behavior had just been witnessed by the woman who would soon own the entire bank. The morning sun still streamed through those tall windows, but now it felt different. Now it felt like a spotlight, illuminating all the changes that were about to come. Michelle pulled out her phone one more time, adding a final note to her growing list of observations about Heritage Bank's current practices. By this time tomorrow, everything about this place would begin to change, and Catherine Walsh would learn that Karma sometimes arrives wearing a designer blazer and carrying a briefcase full of signed documents. Michelle's afternoon meeting wasn't at Heritage Bank's branch office with its gleaming marble floors and discriminatory teller. Instead, she sat in her own corporate headquarters, 40 stories above the city, in a space that reflected everything her company, Phoenix Financial Technologies, stood for. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the cityscape, including the Heritage Bank building several blocks away, but it was the activity inside that truly commanded attention. The conference room hummed with the energy of a dozen brilliant minds. Screens displayed real-time financial data, market analyses, and community impact reports. This was the command center where Michelle had built her fintech empire, transforming from a software developer with a dream into a financial technology powerhouse worth billions. The board meeting is scheduled for 4 p.m. Marcus, her CFO, reported as he pulled up the latest financial projections. At 38, Marcus had been with Michelle since the company's early days, when they worked out of a cramped co-working space in Brooklyn. They're eager to close this deal before word gets out about their liquidity problems. He paused, studying Michelle's expression. But something tells me you found another reason to move forward with this acquisition. Michelle recounted her morning experience, her voice steady but her eyes blazing. 3 hours, Marcus. They made me wait 3 hours to deposit a check, while that teller, Catherine Walsh, served every white customer who walked through the door. I watched 17 people, I counted, get served before me. 5 of them came in after me, all white, all handled immediately. Please tell me you're keeping records of all this, Sarah, her legal counsel, interjected, already pulling out her tablet. Sarah had been headhunted from one of New York's top law firms specifically for her expertise in financial discrimination cases. Her presence here wasn't accidental. Michelle had always known that changing the banking industry would require both technological innovation and legal muscle. Every interaction, every comment, every customer she turned away based on their race. Michelle gestured to her phone. I even have footage from when she tried to send that young couple to the ATM. Our team did a deep dive into their customer service complaints over the past 5 years. Want to guess the pattern we found? Sarah's fingers flew across her tablet as she pulled up the data. Consistent allegations of discrimination, particularly against Black and brown customers. Higher denial rates for loans in minority neighborhoods. Their loan approval rate for Black businesses is 27% lower than for white-owned businesses with identical credit profiles. Their mortgage rejection rate shows similar disparities. She scrolled through more data. But they've managed to stay just under the radar of regulatory scrutiny by masking it all under risk management policies. Until now, Michelle said, standing to walk to the windows. Her reflection overlaid the city view. A successful Black woman in a world that still sometimes refused to see her success as legitimate. She remembered her own journey, the countless times she'd been underestimated, dismissed, or outright blocked. Her first attempt to get a business loan had been rejected by 3 banks, including Heritage, despite her perfect credit score and strong business plan. Now, a decade later, her company processed more daily transactions than most regional banks. Heritage Bank has 12 branches in historically black neighborhoods, she continued, turning back to her team. But look at their community investment numbers. She gestured to a screen showing a map overlaid with financial data. They're sitting on prime real estate without serving the people who actually live there. Their ATM fees in these neighborhoods are 60% higher than in predominantly white areas. Their minimum balance requirements are prohibitive for many working families. They've effectively turned these branches into barriers rather than gateways to financial services. Which is exactly why your fintech solution could transform their entire operation, Marcus added, pulling up another presentation. Mobile banking, simplified loan applications, community investment programs. Everything we've developed could turn those branches into real community assets. Our AI-driven loan assessment algorithm has already proven it can increase approval rates for minority businesses while maintaining risk standards. Dr. Jameson, their head of community impact, stood up to add her perspective. We've run the numbers on potential community impact. If we implement our full suite of programs, we could facilitate over $500 million in new small business loans in underserved communities within the first year. Our financial literacy programs could reach over 50,000 families, and our mobile banking platform would eliminate the need for predatory check cashing services that are currently draining these communities. The afternoon sun caught the edge of the Heritage Bank building, making its windows flash like a signal. Michelle remembered Catherine Walsh's dismissive tone, her automatic assumption that a black woman couldn't possibly have legitimate business at her exclusive bank. That interaction was just the visible tip of a much larger iceberg of systemic discrimination. Pull up Catherine Walsh's employee file, Michelle instructed her assistant. I want to know everything about her performance history. The information appeared on the main screen. 15 years at Heritage Bank, consistently high marks for handling premium clients, but a troubling pattern emerged in the customer complaints. All carefully worded, of course, but the subtext was clear in phrases like selective service and maintaining our traditional clientele. She's their top performing teller, Sarah noted, scrolling through the data, at least by their metrics, which seem to prioritize high-value accounts while ignoring accessibility and community engagement. Look at these performance reviews. She's actually been praised for her discretion in maintaining the bank's exclusive atmosphere. There's more, Marcus added, pulling up additional records. I cross-referenced her Windows transaction data with demographic information. The average wait time for customers of color is 312% longer than for white customers. She's referred 89% of new account applications from black customers for additional verification compared to 12% for white customers. Let's see how she performs under metrics that actually matter, Michelle said, her voice carrying the weight of imminent change. I want a complete audit of every interaction, every transaction, every complaint, not just for her, but for every employee. We're going to bring Heritage Bank into the 21st century, whether they're ready or not. The team spent the next hour refining their strategy. They weren't just buying a bank. They were purchasing an opportunity to demonstrate how financial institutions could thrive by truly serving their entire community. The irony wasn't lost on Michelle. Catherine Walsh's discrimination would ultimately lead to the very changes she seemed to fear most. Jake, their head of technology, presented the technical integration plan. We can have our mobile banking platform ready to roll out within 60 days. The AI-driven loan processing system can be implemented in phases, starting with small business loans. Our community banking app, with its zero-fee structure and financial education components, could be launched in the first wave. Dr. Jameson followed with the community engagement strategy. We've already identified key community partners in each branch location. We can launch financial literacy workshops within the first month. Our small business incubator program could be adapted specifically for these neighborhoods, providing not just capital, but mentorship and technical assistance. As the afternoon progressed, Michelle's team finalized their approach. The plan was comprehensive: technology upgrades, policy overhauls, staff retraining, and community outreach. But perhaps most importantly, a complete restructuring of how performance was measured and rewarded. At 3:45 p.m., Michelle gathered her materials for the board meeting. Her team had prepared a comprehensive presentation on Heritage Bank's potential transformation, but she had added her own slides, documented evidence of the systemic discrimination she'd witnessed firsthand. The data told a story that couldn't be ignored or explained away. Ms. Richardson? Her assistant appeared at the door. There's a call from Heritage Bank's branch manager, David Cooper. Apparently, there's been some confusion about your checks from this morning. He's quite insistent about speaking with you. He mentioned something about clearing up any misunderstandings and maintaining the bank's reputation. Michelle checked her watch and smiled. Tell him I'll be happy to discuss it at the board meeting. In fact, I'd like him and Ms. Walsh to attend. It's time they understand exactly who they've been dealing with. She gathered her tablet and straightened her blazer. And Jessica, make sure the bank's HR director is present too. We'll need to discuss some immediate personnel changes. The Heritage Bank boardroom carried the same air of exclusivity as its branches, all dark wood and leather, portraits of past presidents, all white, all male, lining the walls. Michelle noted the subtle reactions as she entered, the slight widening of eyes, the almost imperceptible straightening of spines. She recognized the look, the same one she'd seen countless times when people had to reconcile their assumptions with the reality of who she was. David Cooper arrived minutes later, Catherine Walsh trailing behind him. They stopped short at the sight of Michelle sitting at the boardroom table, her materials already arranged precisely before her. Catherine's face drained of color as recognition dawned, her hand clutching the folders she carried like a shield. "Please join us," Michelle said, gesturing to the empty seats. "We have a lot to discuss about Heritage Bank's future, including its approach to customer service." She paused, meeting Catherine's eyes directly. "And its treatment of all community members." The board chairman called the meeting to order, but before he could begin his introduction, Catherine stepped forward, her voice carrying a tremor she couldn't quite hide. "I apologize, but there seems to be some mistake. This is a closed board meeting, and Ms. Richardson was attempting to make some suspicious deposits this morning." "Ms. Walsh," the chairman interrupted, his face tightening with embarrassment. "Ms. Richardson is here because her company, Phoenix Financial Technologies, is purchasing a controlling interest in Heritage Bank. The paperwork will be finalized today." Catherine's mouth opened and closed without sound. Behind her, David Cooper seemed to be struggling to maintain his professional demeanor, his eyes darting between Michelle and the chairman as the reality of the situation sank in. "Now then," Michelle said, opening her presentation, "let's talk about the future of Heritage Bank. I've prepared a detailed analysis of current operations, including some rather interesting data about customer service patterns." She met Catherine's stunned gaze directly. "In fact, Ms. Walsh, your interactions with customers will be a particularly illuminating case study in why change is not just necessary but overdue." The afternoon sun slanted through the boardroom windows, casting long shadows across the polished table. In those shadows, Michelle could see the shape of changes to come. Changes that would transform not just Heritage Bank's operations, but its very culture. And somewhere in those shadows, Karma was smiling, knowing that justice sometimes arrived in the most unexpected ways. As Michelle began her presentation, she noticed Catherine Walsh sinking lower in her chair, perhaps finally understanding that her years of discriminatory behavior had led to this moment. But this wasn't just about one prejudiced teller. It was about reshaping an institution that had forgotten its responsibility to serve all members of its community. "Let's begin with some numbers," Michelle said, standing at the head of the Heritage Bank boardroom. The first slide appeared on the screen, a simple photograph of the bank's branch where Catherine Walsh worked. "This morning I spent 3 hours in this branch documenting every interaction. Would you like to know what I observed, Ms. Walsh?" Catherine's fingers gripped the armrests of her chair. The boardroom had grown uncomfortably warm, despite the efficient air conditioning. Around the table, board members leaned forward, their expressions a mix of concern and curiosity. 17 customers served ahead of me despite my arrival first, 5 who entered after me, all white, all served immediately. 1 young black couple directed to an ATM despite your window being open. 6 phone calls you took while I waited, 2 coffee breaks, 1 extended conversation about golf with a white customer. Michelle advanced to the next slide, but that's just today. Let's look at the patterns. The screen filled with graphs and charts, each one damning in its clarity. Over the past 5 years, the average wait time for customers of color at your window is 312% longer than for white customers. You've referred 89% of new account applications from black customers for additional verification, compared to 12% for white customers. Your customer satisfaction ratings show a clear racial disparity that cannot be explained by any legitimate banking factors. "Those numbers could be interpreted different ways," David Cooper interjected, though his voice lacked conviction. "Banking is complex, and risk management requires—" "I was wondering when someone would mention risk management," Michelle said, clicking to the next slide. "Let's talk about risk assessment at Heritage Bank. My team has analyzed every loan application processed through your branch over the past 3 years. We controlled for credit scores, income levels, and all relevant financial factors. The results are interesting. The data appeared in stark relief. Loan rejection rates drastically higher for minority applicants with identical qualifications to approved white applicants. Catherine's face had grown increasingly pale as the presentation continued. Ms. Richardson, the board chairman interrupted, tugging at his collar. While these numbers are concerning, I'm not sure this level of detail is necessary for a standard acquisition meeting. On the contrary, Michelle replied, her voice steady. This is exactly what this meeting needs to be about, because as of today, everything changes. She pressed a button on her remote, and new images filled the screen. This is our plan for transforming Heritage Bank into a true community institution. The next hour was a masterclass in strategic revolution. Michelle laid out Phoenix Financial Technologies' complete vision. AI-driven loan assessment algorithms that eliminated racial bias, mobile banking platforms that would serve underbanked communities, financial literacy programs, and community investment initiatives. With each new proposal, Catherine seemed to shrink further into her chair, perhaps realizing that everything she had tried to protect about Heritage Bank was about to be dismantled. And now, Michelle said, reaching the part of the presentation she'd been anticipating most, let's discuss personnel changes. She pulled up a new slide showing the bank's organizational chart. Effective immediately, we'll be implementing a new customer service evaluation system. Every interaction will be measured not just for efficiency, but for equity and community impact. Catherine's hand shot up, her voice trembling. You can't just change everything. Our customers expect a certain standard of service, a certain environment. By certain environment, do you mean one where people who look like me are made to wait for hours? Where qualified borrowers are denied loans based on their race? Where young couples are sent to ATMs rather than served at your window? Michelle's voice carried steel beneath its professional veneer. Actually, Ms. Walsh, I can change everything, and I will, starting with your position. The HR director, who had been quietly taking notes, looked up sharply. Catherine's face flushed, then paled in rapid succession. You're firing me? That's discrimination. A small smile played at the corners of Michelle's mouth. No, Ms. Walsh, I'm not firing you. That would be too easy. She clicked to the next slide. Instead, you're being reassigned. Effective tomorrow, you'll begin training as our new community outreach specialist. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. On the screen, Michelle's plan detailed Catherine's new role, working directly with the communities she had spent years discriminating against, coordinating financial literacy workshops, helping process small business loan applications from minority entrepreneurs, and reporting directly to Dr. Jameson, the Black woman who headed Phoenix Community Impact Division. You'll be evaluated on how effectively you serve our entire community, Michelle continued. Your bonuses will be tied to customer satisfaction scores from all demographics, loan approval rates for minority applicants, and successful community program implementation. In essence, Ms. Walsh, your success will depend entirely on helping the very people you've spent years turning away. Catherine's mouth opened and closed several times before she found her voice. You can't be serious. I'm not qualified for that position. I'm a teller. You'll receive comprehensive training, Michelle assured her with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. In fact, your first 2 weeks will be spent in an intensive diversity and inclusion program. Following that, you'll be shadowing community organizers in each of our branch neighborhoods. Think of it as an opportunity to broaden your perspective. David Cooper raised his hand tentatively. And my position? Will be reviewed based on your supervision of discriminatory practices, Michelle replied smoothly. Though you might be interested in our new branch manager position opening in our most active community development zone. It's an opportunity to demonstrate your commitment to change. The board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats as Michelle continued outlining the bank's transformation. New policies, new metrics, new expectations, all designed to ensure that what happened to her this morning would never happen to anyone else. Of course, Michelle added, any employee who doesn't wish to be part of our new direction is free to resign, though I should mention that our evidence of discriminatory practices will be shared with all relevant banking authorities and potential future employers, as required by law. Catherine's face crumpled as the full impact of her situation became clear. She was trapped. Leave and face the consequences of her documented discrimination, or stay and work to serve the very communities she had spurned. Now, Michelle said, Pulling up the final slides, let's discuss our timeline for implementation. By this time next week, every branch will have updated policies and training schedules. Within 30 days, our new mobile banking platform will launch. Within 60 days, our first round of community investment programs will be operational. The presentation continued, but Catherine had stopped taking notes. Her world had shifted on its axis, transformed by the very woman she had tried to dismiss this morning. As Michelle detailed the changes coming to Heritage Bank, Catherine realized that her comfortable position of power was gone. Her future would be spent facing daily reminders of her past behavior, working under the supervision of those she had once discriminated against. One final note, Michelle said nearing the end of her presentation. This morning, Ms. Walsh, you made a point of questioning whether I belonged in your exclusive bank. You'll be pleased to know that under our new policies, Heritage Bank will indeed be exclusively committed to serving all members of our community with respect, dignity, and equal treatment. The sun had begun to set outside the boardroom windows, casting long shadows across the faces of those present. In the deepening light, Michelle could see the reality of change settling over the room. The board members looked both chastened and thoughtful, perhaps realizing that this transformation wasn't just necessary, it was overdue. Meeting adjourned, Michelle announced. Ms. Walsh, please see HR to begin your transition paperwork. Dr. Jameson will expect you at community orientation first thing tomorrow morning. And Catherine? She waited until the former teller met her gaze. Do try to be on time. We wouldn't want to keep anyone waiting. As the room emptied, Michelle remained at the head of the table, watching Catherine gather her belongings with trembling hands. The woman who had wielded her position with such discriminatory power this morning now moved like a shadow of herself, the weight of consequences finally settling on her shoulders. Marcus approached Michelle's side. That was both brilliant and brutal, he murmured, making her face the people she discriminated against every day. Having her success depend on serving them well. It's perfect karma. It's not about karma, Michelle replied, though she couldn't quite hide her satisfaction. It's about change. Real lasting change. Sometimes the only way to transform a system is to make those who upheld it face the reality of their actions. Every loan she helps approve, every family she helps achieve financial stability, every small business she supports, that's not punishment, that's redemption. She gathered her materials, preparing to leave the boardroom that would soon see so many more changes. Through the windows, she could see the city spreading out before her, thousands of lives that would be impacted by the transformation of Heritage Bank. In the reflection of the darkening glass, she caught a glimpse of Catherine Walker slipping out the door, heading toward her new future, one where she would learn that true banking excellence meant serving all people, not just the ones she chose to see. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. Heritage Bank would start its journey toward becoming a true community institution, and Catherine Walsh would start her journey toward understanding that the people she had dismissed as unworthy were actually the key to her own professional survival. Sometimes, Michelle reflected, justice didn't arrive with a bang, but with a series of small, daily moments of enlightenment. And somewhere in the city, a young black couple who had been turned away from a bank teller's window would soon return to find a very different Heritage Bank waiting for them, one where their dreams would be given the same respect and consideration as anyone else's. That, Michelle decided, was the sweetest revenge of all.